Good morning, everybody. I'm Laurence Higginson. Can you hear me all right? Is it my two down? That's great. So very pleased to be with you this morning, and I'm going to lead on from the excellent presenters before me to talk about ventilation. And I'd like to start by asking the question, why is ventilation important when we talk about sustainability in buildings? 40%, the estimate is that 40% of energy use in the EU is due to the building sector. That's massive, right? And approximately 60% of energy use in buildings is HVAC. At least it is in Europe. Second thing is, you might say, okay, well, let's save energy. In France, we tried this. We turned down the heating during winter. President said, let's turn down the heating. Made a lot of people quite unhappy, because at the end of the day, a building is a place where you want to work, right? Or you want to live. It's a place where you need to be productive, you need to be healthy. Ventilation is an important part of making that happen. Bad indoor air quality can lead to problems of health, but also problems with your concentration and productivity. So ventilation is a given. It's mandatory in a building. So I think today our challenge is we want to remain in a case where buildings are a nice place to work and to be, but at the same time we need to save energy and make them more sustainable. So why is ventilation something that can enable us to do that? Ventilation is a massive lever. First of all, because approximately, if we look at a ventilation unit or an air handling unit, I'd say 98% of the CO2 emissions of an air handling unit happen during what we were talking about earlier, this use stage. So we can do whatever we want in our factory. We can recycle as well as we like. 98% of the impact will be that unit working in the building. And that's what Charlotte was saying earlier. Often we don't know how it's going to work, but it's important. The second thing is that approximately, and this really depends on the building design, but between 20 and 40% of the complete building use is ventilation. So buildings are a lot of the energy we use in Europe, and ventilation is a lot of the energy we use in buildings. So it's important we take a look at it. I took an example. So in this case, on the bottom left, it's a case study I did recently. It's a ventilation unit with a heat recovery. That's mandatory today in Europe in these type of applications. I took an office, approximately 4,000 square meters, 250 people, and that unit costs the equipment itself about 30,000 euros. What's interesting to see is if we take, I took 20, I'm not 27 years, but if we look at 20 years of running that unit, in that scenario, right, I'm running it during the day, it's only off at night, there's nobody in the building during the weekend. If I do that, it's going to cost me 120,000 euros to heat, cool, and use the electricity to run the fans and pumps. That's 4 times what the unit costs. So what happens if we buy a better unit? Okay, it's going to be slightly more expensive. So in this case, it's an extra 3,000 euros on top, extra 10%. You might think, a lot of people tell us that's a lot, right? They're not going to pay for the unit. They're going to go and buy another one. That's a lot of money on the market. But what do these 3,000 euros enable us to do? We can drop the heating, we can drop the cooling requirement, and we can significantly drop the amount of electricity that unit's going to be using. I'm using numbers based on French electricity, which is not the most expensive in Europe. And I've also taken a flat rate for the next 20 years, which we all know is not going to happen, right? So this is a pretty conservative scenario. But if I do that, it's 85,000 euros of energy consumption due to this unit. That's a net saving of 35K. It's a payback of what? Times 11, a bit more, right? And more importantly, it's a 30% less energy cost on running that one unit in a building. The lever is massive. So what's our challenge? Because there is one. Charlotte was saying earlier, you can produce a good product. If you run that product for 20 hours, it's going to use more energy than if you run it for 3, right? Everybody understands that. So the actual energy that these equipment are going to be used depend on a number of criteria during the use phase. The first is the type of building. If I have an office or a swimming pool, we all understand the energy I need to heat and cool and bring air into those, or dehumidify for a swimming pool, are going to be completely different. If my building's in Milan or if it's in Oslo, that's going to be a completely different energy map, right? Heating and cooling. Same occupation. If I have a school, it's going to be closed. In our case in France, like a lot of the summer. Also, we don't work in schools on the weekends. But if I have a hospital ward, we're going to have patients 24/7, 365. That's going to be open all the time. Same on the building design, a big glass tower that architects love so much. Huh? They're wonderful, they're really pretty to look at, but from an energy standpoint, they need usually a lot of cooling. If I have a net zero energy building, like a proper bioclimatic design, I'm going to be able to drop that building load. And then the last point is the technical efficiency, the one I was talking about in the previous slide. If I have, a state-of-the-art building with really good technologies inside, that's probably going to be more efficient than a good old gas or coil boiler in the basement, right? We can all understand that. So there are many criteria, and each of these vary. So it's a real challenge. And I like to say, it's not because if it's a challenge that we don't do anything about it. We have to act it. Usually the first full criteria are set by the customer, the architect, the building design, where it is. These are all things we don't, as manufacturers, have a lot of influence over. But what we can and what we do impact are the different levels of energy that happen inside the building and the efficiency of the piece of equipment that we design. So the big question for me is, how do we help customers make the right choice? Because I often think nothing looks as much as an air handling unit as another air handling unit, right? Take a walk around this hall. They're big boxes, right? The stuff in them, they all look the same. And also, how do we support people making sustainable designs? Because they're going to have to live with that for decades. So Eurovent Association came up with the case study. So what's the target of this case study? It says, okay, the building energy use depends on the type of building. Okay, let's define 3 groups with 3 different building types. A kindergarten, it's a bit like an office building, right? You're going to be there during the day, it's closed at night and during the weekends. A restaurant, so the restaurant's going to be open maybe on longer hours, later at night than a typical school. And then a residential building, well, that's going to be running 24/7. So these are 3 different occupational scenarios, right? The time that you're going to be spending in the building. The next is the location. So we took meaningful locations across Europe and said, okay, let's sit, in the major capitals, different climatic areas. We took a reasonable spread. Luckily for me today, there was Frankfurt on the map, so that was quite nice. So I have an example for Frankfurt. And then we took a dive into Frankfurt and said, okay, let's look at different energy efficiency of the equipment. And in order to do that, we took an existing methodology that every Eurovent certified air handling unit manufacturer calculates and reports on every single unit. So it's an existing methodology. And this methodology defines energy classes for units. So I took a look between Class C and Class A+. They're both legal on the European market. You can sell them both, and they would achieve exactly the same thing. They will get the air into the building, they will do heat recovery. It's just they won't use the same amount of energy in doing that. And here again, if we take the net difference between the two, it's in this case 35% less energy between a Class C and a Class A+. So, target of this document was to say, okay, great. I get that it's an EVA. I get that there's real potential. But you studied it for Frankfurt, and I'm unique. So, what does that picture look like for my building? Exactly like you said earlier, Charlotte. What does that look like for my design of a building? Because it's not all standard design you took here. So in this case, the real tool to do this is something called an LCC. So it's a life cycle cost analysis. And what it does is it looks very much like the LCA, in my opinion. It looks at the different phases of a construction and the use of a product. It says I need to produce it, I need to install it, commission it, run it for as many years as possible, maintain it, change filters, change fans maybe if I need to do that. And then at the end of its life, I need to get rid of it. And what we see, like I was saying earlier, is that for our products, the use phase is by far the most impactful phase for the customer. But the one where they make their decision is the initial phase. That's where you have to pay for it. And I said earlier, 30,000 euros, right? It's an expensive piece of kit. You can buy a nice car for that. So what happens a lot is people want to buy a better, cheaper piece of equipment, right? So let's shave off 10%. You get exactly the opposite of what I just showed you earlier. So this tool is really, in my opinion, the right tool to give customers the global view, right? If I invest now this much, what is that going to look like in the total cost of ownership? And I really feel that from a sustainability, but also from an economical standpoint, those are the type of discussions we should be having. Challenge, there is no one way of doing an LCC. So I can say, I can do it one way, and then my colleague from another company says, well, I'm going to do it in another way. And maybe I'd even decide that for 2 different countries, I want to do it in 2 different ways or 2 different product lines. So what do we have? We have a customer who's now looking again at thousands of pages of documents, unable to understand what they mean, not able to compare products. So maybe I have 2 very similar products, but on the paper, they look completely different. Or the contrary, they're pretty much the same. These 2 manufacturers have both done a good job, except one was pretty sneaky on how they presented their data. We're not helping, right? We're not helping customers make the right decision. So again, the association put a bunch of very talented people together, worked for a long time on this, and came up with a proposal on how an LCC should look. Where possible, it was based on existing standards. It came from the industry itself, and I'm also with you, Charlotte. There were lots of discussions, right? We push, we pull, we disagree. But at the end, we come up with something that we feel brings the industry forward and is more fair to the customer. So I think that was really good work done. And the target is obviously to agree on, okay, guys, this is how we're all going to work. This is the common methodology. And I think what we expect out of this, and really the opportunity that we see, is the customers can make decisions based on total cost and not just the initial cost. And it's tempting, right? When I go and buy a TV, and the guy says to me, look, I have 3, right? And one is 500, another one's 1,000, another one's 1,500 euros. It's okay, what's the difference? Well, they're all the same. I'm going to buy the cheap one, right? And I think the issue today is customers are buying equipment because they believe that they're all the same. And then they sometimes see during the durations, it's very expensive. And actually sometimes gives us a bad reputation. Like ventilation equipment is expensive to run. It is, but it doesn't have to be. The second thing is there's a huge payback. I showed that to you earlier, right? We're asking for maybe, in my case, 3,000 extra euros. You're going to get that back 10, 11 times. Probably better than Bitcoin, right? Also to help people make better initial investments. It's really hard when you're negotiating your budget. Usually budgets do this, right? They never really increase. So maybe we should be discussing where should you be putting your money to have the best payback. And I don't think customers really know this. We also see huge potential on fueling sustainable buildings. That's the direction we want to take, but that make economical sense. We're not telling people you're going to have to pay so much more to buy and to run the sustainable building. No. You have to invest a little bit smarter, but there's a massive payback, and it makes ecological and economical sense, which is quite nice. And also show transparency. I don't think we want to live with a fragmented market where customers have absolutely no way of understanding what is efficient and what is not. So transparency is important to us. Here you find QR codes if you're interested in these documents. They're really easy to download on the web page, and we put everything in the presentation. So should be really, really snappy and easy. So in a summary, I'd like to say that, clearly Europe is on a journey towards a more sustainable future. I'm quite proud of that. We can see now that not all nations agree with us. I think some other people see a different future. But I really believe we're on the right track. And I also am pleased and proud probably to be part of an industry that can really make a difference in this. We can, as it was said earlier, we can bring good air to people. We can make sure children can concentrate at school because they don't have crazy levels of CO2 in classrooms. But we can also do that in a sustainable way. What I also see in the group is a real strong commitment. It's great. The members who are in Eurovent are, like I said earlier, very, very talented people, often decades of experience in the industry and super motivated to make a difference. That's really something that I enjoy personally, and it makes me really proud to be part of these groups. I had a couple of slides to talk about the association. They didn't come through. So in a few words, I think that sort of the mission that we're trying to carry is to bring the industry together. There are 200 plus manufacturers in Europe, right? That's a lot. And each of those are serving specific markets with specific customers. At the association, we try to, pull the industry in a direction that's good for us, but also that's good for our customers. We also try to, I find, try and make very complex topics understandable. Because we know that if we go to governmental agencies or commissions, they're not going to get all the nitty-gritty of the details, and they don't need to. We need to translate it and make it simple so that they can make the right decisions. We spend a lot of time doing that. I think we spend a lot of time coming with meaningful proposals. I think we've shown a couple of them today that really help the industry align. Okay, this is how we're going to do it. There is no good or bad at the end of the day. I think every company who's built, for instance, an LCC did it with a really good intent in mind. They just did it in a different way. And now we're saying, okay, let's take the customer perspective. Let's make it meaningful to the person who's paying the money and using this piece of equipment. So let's all agree and do it in the same way. And I think that's something we've achieved pretty well. Sadly, our chairman is not with us today, but he's here at ISH. And I think we're under good guidance and we're doing a pretty good job. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your support. And yeah, if you want to come and talk to any of us, I think the names of the companies you got. I'm from a company called robatherm. It's really cool. We're just downstairs. And I'm also here with some colleagues who are real specialists of this area. So if you have some questions about the case study, where we're going, and how to understand all of this, please come and have a chat with us or the other companies. Thank you very much. Yeah.